Welcome to all of you. Those of you who are new to this place, my name is Georgetown. I'm the Dean here at School of Foreign Service in Qatar. I'm absolutely delighted to have Ambassador Pablo Kang, the Ambassador of Australia, here with us today for a presentation and then some discussion afterwards. On the subject, as you know from the title of the invitation, is about Australia's turn on the Security Council. But we thought that would be a really interesting subject, particularly for people interested in international affairs more generally, to see how a smaller or middle power does multilateral diplomacy. It's a peculiar, perhaps not self-evident role, a challenging area to play. So, but as those of you familiar with our practice already know, what often happens is that we get one of our students to introduce the speaker. So that's what's now going to happen. And our student is a sophomore, I believe. Oh, you're a freshman, even more impressive. Who will introduce Ambassador Kang. That's right. So over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, good evening and welcome. Tonight we have a special guest, His Excellency Ambassador Pablo Kang. Mr. Kang has been the Ambassador of Australia to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar since 2012. And prior to that, he served overseas as the Deputy Head of Mission and Counselor at the Australian Embassy in Manila from 2006 to 2008, and then as High Commissioner to Vanuatu from 2009 to 2010. He holds a graduate diploma in Foreign Affairs and Trade from Monash University, as well as a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Law from the University of Sydney. We are very privileged here at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Qatar to have frequent and esteemed diplomats to inspire us in our studies of current affairs, to provide us with role models, and to help us aspire to bigger goals. Many of the students here, myself included, have aspirations to be in the Foreign Service and the future faces of our nations. And so, under the exemplary model of prominent diplomats such as Ambassador Kang, we believe that we may one day too reach our goals. On that note, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to His Excellency Ambassador Pablo Kang, Ambassador of Australia to the United Arab Emirates and Qatar.
Assalamu alaikum. Masah khair. And apologies for my delayed appearance. The Doha traffic in the 3 years I've been coming to Doha doesn't seem to have progressed very much. This is a text. I do have some photos, so if someone can tell me how to, is this it? Okay. Okay, let's see. So this is forward, I guess.
This is forward.
Okay, excellent, excellent, thank you. Even I can work that out, I think. All right, well, firstly to the Dean, Gerd Nonnemann, guests, students of the university. It is a great pleasure to be back here at Georgetown. I was last here, I think, a little over 2 years ago, accompanying one of our former Prime Ministers, Kevin Rudd, and he spoke to the university in November 2012 on the topic of what the change in communist leadership says about China's future. It was literally the day after they'd had the change in leadership of the Communist Party. And now, Mr. Rudd has since retired from Australian politics and is now based at another prestigious American institution, Harvard University, and still ruminating about all things to do with China. Well, thankfully, I'm not here to talk about China, which is a country I visited many times, including earlier this year when I took my 6-year-old son to see the great pandas in Chengdu, but from a policy sense about which I know comparatively little. I would like to thank University, particularly Jonathan Cartmel, a past committee member of the Qatar Australia New Zealand Business Council, or Business Association, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary tomorrow, for giving me this opportunity here today. And I hope there is equal opportunity for a good deal of Q&A at the end of my presentation. Well, today's talk really does resonate with one of Australia's top foreign policy initiatives from a public diplomacy perspective, and that is to promote the work we have done as a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for the past 2 years. And in talking about this today, I'm of course also conscious of Qatar's inaugural and successful membership of the UN Security Council in 2006 and 2007, and its strong support for Australia's most recent bid. But firstly, a bit of background. So the first part of the title of this lecture is Multilateral Diplomacy, and I'd like to think Australia has historically had a very good record in this area. And of course, multilateral diplomacy is about more than the UN. See, for example, the machinations of the members of the World Trade Organization, or APEC, to name a couple of examples. But for today's purposes, I will confine my remarks about the UN. Australia was one of the founding members of the United Nations back in 1945, and one of our former foreign ministers, Dr. H.V. Evatt, was president of the third regular session of the UN General Assembly way back in 1948. And as a founding member, we fought for the inclusion of economic, social and development provisions of the United Nations Charter. That is, not just a focus on civil and political rights, and for all states, no matter their size, to be treated equally. And we stand by these principles today. Now, Australia is an active participant in all UN institutions. We are the 12th largest contributor to the UN regular budget, and also the 12th largest contributor to the UN's separate peacekeeping budget. And this makes sense as we are the world's 12th largest economy. We have volunteered about 65,000 personnel to more than 50 United Nations and other multilateral peace and security operations worldwide, including in Timor-Leste, or as we call it, East Timor, Solomon Islands, Lebanon, Sudan, Cyprus, Korea, Somalia and Rwanda. And this somewhat blurry image shows where Australian police have been involved with UN peacekeeping missions around the world. And you see there's a very diverse spread there. And Cyprus is actually an interesting example that Australian police have been in Cyprus for over 50 years continuously supporting peacekeeping operations in Cyprus. Australia's campaign for our current United Nations Security Council membership was a long-term project. Then Prime Minister Rudd, who came and addressed you a couple of years ago, announced our candidacy back in March 2008. And the government developed a strategy for each phase, and obviously the last 24 months were the most intensive. And this was one I personally was heavily involved with in 2009 and 2010 as the head of the International Organisations branch in our Foreign Ministry in Canberra. Australia's campaign was based on the key theme of making a difference for the small and medium countries of the world. Sorry, okay, that's it. That was our logo, and that was our brand, if you like. We highlighted Australia's credentials for making constructive contributions across the Council's agenda, in particular through increased access for small and medium countries to the Council and for greater Council transparency, including in terms of debriefs and debriefs to the media after each session. In building on our strong record of achievement in international peace and security, including in arms control and disarmament, development, peacekeeping as mentioned, human rights and humanitarian assistance, and increasing the effectiveness and accountability of the UN through the reform processes underway. The outcome of the vote on the 18th of October 2012 was a resounding endorsement by UN members of our candidacy, and that's just a picture of our then Foreign Minister Bob Carr at the moment of the announcement of the results. We received 140 votes in support of Australia in the first round of voting. Strong support in particular from the Pacific, Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, the Stands, and might I say from our friends here in the Gulf. And only 4 countries have exceeded this number of votes for any contested election in the past 4 decades involving the group that we are part of in the UN system, which is the Western European and Others group, also known as WEOG. Many factors contributed to the success of our campaign. We ran a very positive campaign which focused on our credentials with an authentic Australian brand, resonated both with officials in New York and in capitals around the globe. We had very strong political commitment at the highest levels, including by our Governor-General, our de facto head of state, our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister. We highlighted our role in key multilateral forums such as the Commonwealth. We hosted the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Perth in 2011, our membership of the G20 and the East Asia Summit, and these strategic partnerships built through those organisations were significant assets for us. And we maximised the use of our global network. We didn't take any vote for granted. We remained engaged with countries right up until the very end. We also solidified our base of support amongst the Asia Pacific, which I think, given where we are, helped to distinguish us from the two European candidates, Finland and Luxembourg, who were vying for the same 2 seats on the Security Council. Upon taking up our seat, the then Prime Minister of Australia, Julia Gillard, said that Australia's key priorities will include Afghanistan, Syria, Iran and North Korea. And Australia will also work to ensure the effectiveness of the UN Security Council sanctions regimes, including those targeting individuals associated with Al-Qaeda. So after a 26-year absence, we hadn't been on the Council since 1986, on the 1st of January last year we took up our role as an elected member of the Council. Now, as I'm sure everybody knows here, difficulties in achieving the Council's objectives can arise due to the dynamics between members. After all, the Council is a group of 15 sovereign states pursuing their own national interests, which don't always align. There can be difficult dynamics between the 5 permanent Council members that we call the P5, the US, the UK, Russia, France and China, who use the Council as one of their primary vehicles for pursuing their security interests, and global power politics naturally play out in Council deliberations as they do elsewhere. The other members of the Council, what's called the E10 or the elected 10, are not a coherent group to counterbalance the P5. There are divisions often over the Security Council's role when considering what have traditionally been thought of as the internal affairs of states, particularly around the notion of the use of force. And for example, divisions on Syria are driven by fundamental differences over sovereignty, non-intervention and the Council's role. I guess what most people do not see, and what the media does not focus on, is the day-to-day business of the Council, which has a real impact on international peace and security. And at the moment, the Council is more engaged internationally and has a broader agenda than at any time in its history. The agenda is very demanding. To give you an example, from January to November this year, there were 234 meetings of the Council, 153 additional consultations. The Council passed 55 resolutions, 24 presidential statements and 127 press statements. The pace is relentless and often unpredictable. And during our time on the Council, the workload has only increased with the deterioration of peace and security in many countries, including Ukraine, Syria, Iraq, Sudan, South Sudan, and the Central African Republic. Since the end of the Cold War, there's been a rapid increase in the number and complexity of peacekeeping operations, and today there are 16 peacekeeping missions with over 110,000 deployed personnel and a UN budget of $7.5 billion. And there are also 13 sanctions regimes. The Security Council regularly reviews situations in almost 40 countries, roughly 2/3 of which are in Africa. And there is a preponderance of situations in the Middle East, North Africa, Afghanistan, and Timor-Leste, which the Council considers. The Council has an important role also in terms of creating and advancing policy on various thematic issues, particularly in post-conflict situations. These themes include women, peace and security, children and armed conflict, and the protection of civilians. So what have been our achievements? Well, without blowing our own trumpet too much, we believe Australia has established a reputation for contributing constructively across the Council's agenda, working with Council members to build consensus, and pressing for action to address serious challenges to international peace and security. And we believe we've clocked up a number of significant achievements in the Council. We've been instrumental in effective responses to crises. In fact, we were very fast to respond to the downing of Malaysian Airlines MH17. And out of the 298 victims, 38 of them were Australian citizens and residents. And so we had a very personal interest in trying to resolve that crisis. We are key advocates in supporting the ongoing investigation and the report, and we're committed to finalising particularly investigations at the crash site and to pursuing accountability. We have pushed the Council towards unified action to address the crisis in Syria, which can fairly be characterised as the greatest humanitarian crisis since World War II. So the war in Syria is now in its 4th year. Almost half of the population of Syria, of more than 20 million people, have fled or have been displaced. And when we first joined the Council last year, the number of officially registered refugees was 500,000, and today it's 3.2 million. And of course, in reality, the figure is much higher than that. Australia co-authored Resolution 2139, which demanded that all parties to the conflict cease deliberate attacks on civilians, end sieges, and facilitate access for humanitarian assistance. And this resolution was passed unanimously in February this year. Having said that, the Syrian regime failed to comply, and we pushed for a follow-up resolution which was co-authored with Luxembourg and Jordan, and resolution was Resolution 2165, which was adopted in July this year, and that's just a picture of the vote in the Council on that. There has been a modest improvement in the humanitarian situation since the adoption of Resolution 2165. The Secretary-General's report confirms that the Council action in adopting that resolution was important, but obviously significant challenges, including from terrorist groups, remain. And at present, no more than 2 convoys per month have been able to get inside Syria with humanitarian relief. In September 2013, when we had the presidency of the Security Council, we also facilitated passage of Resolution 2118 on the elimination of Syria's chemical weapons. And as of today, about 98% of Syria's chemical weapons stockpiles have been eliminated. Australia has worked hard to strengthen the Council's counterterrorism agenda through a greater focus on emerging challenges such as countering violent extremism, internet radicalisation and recruitment. Our Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, that's her there, hosted an open debate and secured a presidential statement this month on counterterrorism and foreign terrorist fighters as one of our initiatives during our presidency in November. And we also co-sponsored and advocated for the US resolution on foreign terrorist fighters in September, which showed international solidarity on the need to degrade Daesh, to address the rise in foreign fighters, and to deal with violent extremism. And again, this is an issue that's very personal for us, as we have an estimated 60 Australian citizens who are fighting with extremist groups inside Syria at the moment. We have had a major focus on sanctions against both Al-Qaeda and Taliban, as well as other militant groups in North Africa and the Sahel. That's a major part of our counterterrorism work as the chair of the Al-Qaeda and Taliban sanctions committees of the United Nations Security Council. We've also been a strong advocate for human rights considerations to be factored into the Council's work, including in negotiations on establishing and monitoring the mandates for Mali and the Central African Republic, and Council deliberations on Ukraine. We also convened meetings into the human rights situation in Syria in June last year and North Korea in April this year. Australia hosted a side event on women's participation in post-conflict peace building, and in June this year hosted a panel discussion specifically on the role of UN police peacekeepers in addressing conflict-related sexual violence. In the past 2 years, we've also been what is called the pen holder, or the country with a major responsibility on the Council on Afghanistan. And Australia facilitated mandate renewals for the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan in March this year, and for the International Security Assistance Force in October last year, and will work to ensure continued focus on strengthening human rights, particularly for women and children, as well as governance, health and education inside Afghanistan. In our role as chair of the Taliban Sanctions Committee, we're also supporting the transition in Afghanistan, working to ensure that the Taliban sanctions regime is geared towards supporting peace and reconciliation negotiations, including by considering modifications to travel bans on select Taliban negotiators in due course, and as well as encouraging greater cooperation between the committee and the Afghan government on the procedures for designating and delisting persons and entities. Australia has also consistently drawn attention to the need to continue to promote and protect women and children's rights in Afghanistan, and to strengthen human rights institutions such as the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. As an Asia-Pacific country, of course, we've tried to bring a particular Asia-Pacific perspective to the Council's work, particularly focused on issues directly affecting our region's stability, especially on non-proliferation, counterterrorism and peacekeeping. As we promised during our campaign, we also are deeply committed to ensuring that the views, experiences and lessons of the broader UN membership are heard by the Council, and we believe that we have used our Council term to provide a voice for the small and medium countries of the world. For example, we engage very much in regional outreach and discussion, such as the working group on counterterrorism that is part of the Pacific Islands Forum. The Pacific Islands, of course, are in our own backyard and do not really have a say on the UN Security Council, which is, I guess, why Australia's role on the Council has been very important in reflecting the views that they have. We also tried to highlight successful examples of peacekeeping and peace building from our own region, including Timor-Leste, also and Solomon Islands, which was not a UN Security Council mission, but I think a very successful example of a regional peacekeeping initiative. And we've tried to promote closer collaboration between the Council and regional organisations, for example, the African Union. Australia had the presidency of the Council last month, and we tried to use it to steer action to better respond to critical threats to international peace and security, with a focus on combating terrorism, as I mentioned, including foreign terrorist fighters, UN policing, and reform of the sanctions regime. And in sanctions, I mean specifically how to integrate sanctions with other parts of the UN system that are dealing with the same crisis, and also with other non-UN institutions such as Interpol. So in conclusion, it's been a busy 2 years for Australia. The UN Security Council, of course, is by no means a perfect beast. Negotiations over reform of the Council, such as potential expansion of membership, which countries should be permanent members, and what to do with the veto. These negotiations have been around a long time and will no doubt continue for a long time. And the Council is, after all, a reflection of the broader UN family. In the words of the former UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, who was Secretary General in the 1950s, the UN was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell. Australia considers itself a good international citizen, and we hope we've played this role on the Council. The outcomes have served our purpose, boosted our international profile, promoted our national interests in relation to key areas of the globe, such as Afghanistan and Timor-Leste, and helped us galvanise international action in response to unforeseen and difficult political situations, such as MH17 and Ukraine. So, I'm happy now to take questions or comments, including, if you like, on non-UN Security Council issues. For more on our work on the UN Security Council, you can go to www.australia-unsc.gov.au. And for more information on what I do more broadly, particularly in the bilateral relationship with both the UAE and Qatar, you can follow me on Twitter, and that's at AUSAMBUAE. Thank you very much.